The fireworks started at 10 o'clock in the morning, not the real kind. Those would come tonight, when Cedar Falls gathered along the riverbank and tilted their faces skyward and felt for a few minutes like the country still meant something simple and good. These were the smaller kind, the sharp crack of a snare drum from the high school marching band, 2 blocks east, the pop of a starter pistol signaling the 5-kilometer run down Main Street, the bright percussion of 1,000 conversations layered over patriotic brass. The 4th of July parade was assembling itself outside Liberty Diner's plate glass windows like a slow, cheerful tide, and inside, the breakfast rush had swollen to something close to capacity. 28 people. Booths packed, the counter full. The air thick with the smell of maple syrup, bacon grease, and coffee brewed strong enough to strip paint. Ivy Coleman moved between tables with the practiced economy of someone who had waited this floor for 6 years and knew its rhythms the way a sailor knows currents. When to slow, when to pivot, when to smile through the kind of tired that doesn't show on your face until you catch yourself in the reflection of the coffee carafe. She was refilling the corner booth when the bell above the door announced him. Most people looked up. That was the nature of Liberty Diner on a holiday morning. The door opened and heads turned out of habit, a leftover social reflex from the kind of small town where strangers were still worth noticing. What they saw was a man in his early 40s, lean in the way that suggests sustained effort rather than good fortune, wearing a flannel shirt washed to the color of old slate and jeans that had been through more than a few seasons. His dark hair was cut short with military precision, though that detail registered only as neatness to most of the room. What registered more immediately was the prosthetic. His left leg, from the knee down, was a matte gray carbon fiber shaft, ending in a specialized foot designed for walking rather than aesthetics. It made a faint, distinct sound against Liberty Diner's black and white tile floor, a quiet, rhythmic contact, different enough from a standard footstep to pull the eye down and then, for most people, away again. The man's name was Caleb Hayes, though nobody in the room knew that yet. He carried no announcement of himself. He stood in the doorway for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to read the room, count the exits, and note the one anomaly that nobody else was paying attention to. And then he moved toward the host stand. Beside him, matching his pace with the fluid attentiveness of an animal that has spent years learning one person's rhythm, was Rex. The Belgian Malinois was 7 years old, which in working dog years meant he wore the same quiet authority as a veteran sergeant. Competent past the need to prove it, alert without the anxious energy of youth, his sable and black coat carrying a few silver threads along the muzzle that spoke of campaigns nobody would ever fully document. He moved with his head at Caleb's left hip, not pulling, not lagging, simply present in the way that very good working dogs are present, completely. Otis Briggs was behind the host stand before Caleb reached it. Otis was 43, manager of Liberty Diner for 11 years, a man who had built his professional identity around the smooth operation of a contained space. He was not cruel by nature. He was, in his own estimation, a problem solver. And Caleb Hayes, with a large dog on a workday morning during the diner's busiest rush, presented itself to Otis's mind as a problem requiring immediate solution. "No pets," Otis said. The words came out flat, the way policy sounds when it's being used as armor. "He's a service animal." Caleb's voice was quiet, not soft. There's a difference. Quiet in the way that suggests the speaker has learned that volume is rarely the point. "I need documentation." The word hung between them. Around them, the diner continued its morning business, but something in the exchange had shifted the ambient attention of the room, the way a dropped fork shifts it, briefly, instinctively, involuntarily. From the large booth to the left of the door, Fletcher Donovan heard the word documentation and permitted himself a small smile. Fletcher occupied space the way that men accustomed to a certain kind of local prominence occupy it, expansively with the unconscious assumption that the room arranges itself around their comfort. His linen blazer was the color of cream. His watch was Swiss, and his dark hair was combed with the kind of deliberate precision that announces effort while pretending casualness. He was 47, the most successful building contractor in Cedar County, a man whose name appeared on plaques in the Chamber of Commerce and whose handshake appeared in campaign photographs. 2 of the 4 people at his table had laughed at something he'd said within the last 90 seconds. The other two were preparing to. He leaned slightly toward Dahlia Walsh, who sat across from him in a silk blouse the color of expensive rose gold, her fingers wrapped around a mimosa glass, her manicured nails catching the light. "Otis knows what he's doing," Fletcher said, low enough for the table but carrying easily to the surrounding booths. "Some people just need reminding about the rules." Dahlia touched her lips with one finger and looked toward the door with the expression of someone observing a minor social inconvenience from a comfortable distance. "It's just a lot this early," she said. "People bringing their animals everywhere like the rest of us don't exist." Ivy Coleman heard this. She registered it with the practiced neutrality of a woman who has spent years hearing things she isn't supposed to react to while carrying hot plates. She set the coffee carafe down and looked at the man by the door. She saw the prosthetic. She saw the dog. She saw the set of Caleb's shoulders, not defensive, not aggressive, carrying the particular stillness of someone who has learned not to spend energy on battles that aren't the battle. She saw the backs of his hands where they rested at his sides, and registered without knowing why, that the scar running across the right one, lateral, old, clean-healed, looked different from an accident. She walked past Otis. "There's a table open on the side," she said, addressing it to the space between them, not making it a confrontation. "I'll take responsibility." Otis looked at her with the expression of a man who wanted to argue but had 3 other tables waiting. "One complaint," he said, "and I'm asking him to leave." Ivy nodded and turned to Caleb. "This way." He followed her. Rex followed him. The conversation around them reassembled itself and moved on. The table was in the far right corner of the room, positioned beside a window that gave a clear view of Main Street, where the parade's opening elements were beginning their slow processional. The color guard in pressed uniforms, small children on bicycle floats wrapped in red, white, and blue crepe, a flatbed truck carrying 6 veterans from the VFW post in folding chairs. Caleb sat with his back to the wall, facing the room. It was not a choice. It was a habit that had long since ceased to be conscious. Rex settled on the floor beside him, pressed against the base of the booth, his dark eyes moving through the room with the same unhurried competence he applied to everything. It was when they passed the corner table, the one positioned furthest from the windows, furthest from the door, occupied by a single man in a dark jacket who had not touched his water glass or opened his menu since arriving 40 minutes ago, that Rex's movement changed. It was subtle, a fractional shift in his head angle, the muzzle lifting by perhaps 2 centimeters, the nostrils working in a way that was different from the ordinary cataloging of breakfast smells. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then Rex settled into his position at Caleb's feet. Only Caleb noticed. He placed his hands flat on the table, both of them palms down, and looked at the menu without reading it. He was already counting. The distance from Rex's position to the corner table, approximately 22 feet. The number of people currently between his table and the door, 14. The man in the dark jacket had a duffel bag under the chair, partially visible beneath the table's overhang, the zipper half open in a way that was either careless or deliberate. The man had ordered nothing. He had been here long enough for the condensation on his untouched water glass to have fully formed and begun to run. The parade would pass directly in front of Liberty Diner's windows at 11 o'clock. The local news had reported 412 participants confirmed. The Cedar Falls School District had bussed in 3 elementary schools. The clock above the counter read 10:41 a.m., 19 minutes. Ivy reappeared with a coffee carafe. She poured without being asked and set down a small ceramic bowl of water beside the table's edge without comment. Caleb looked up at the bowl, then at her. "That's for him," she said simply. Rex looked at the bowl, then up at Caleb. Caleb gave the smallest of nods. Rex drank. Ivy started to move away. Caleb said quietly, "Do you have your phone on you?" She turned. Something in the register of the question, and not casual, not conversational, made her pause. "Yes. Why? Can I use it for a minute?" She studied him. The question was odd. His expression was not. There was a specificity behind his eyes that didn't match the mild request. "Sure," she said, and reached into her apron pocket. Before she could hand it over, her own phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen, Cedar Falls Elementary. Her face shifted, the particular reflex of a parent navigating the perpetual low-level emergency of single parenthood. "1 second," she said, and turned away. Caleb watched her go. Then he looked at the man in the corner whose name was Jasper Slade, though this too was something nobody in the room knew yet, had not moved. He sat with the stillness of someone conserving energy for a specific moment rather than resting. His hands were in his lap. His eyes were aimed at the window. He had the lean, arranged appearance of a man who had dressed that morning for a purpose rather than a day. Caleb registered all of this through his peripheral vision without looking directly at him. One of the first things they teach you, though teach is the wrong word for something you absorb through years of exposure to environments where looking at something directly is the thing that gets you noticed, is that staring is a transmission. It announces itself. Information moves better sideways. He reached his right hand to the edge of the table. 3 light taps, 2 slower ones, 3 light again, dot, 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 dash, dash, dot, 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 SOS, repeated in the key of fingers on Formica. He did it twice and stopped. At the far end of the counter, a man in his early 70s set down a coffee mug. Silas had occupied the same stool at the Liberty Diner counter for the better part of 12 years, arriving each weekday morning at 10 and leaving before noon. He wore the same type of thing most mornings: work pants, a plain shirt, boots that still held a boot camp shine 30 years past the last inspection that required it. His hands were large and mapped with the topography of heavy use, and his left forearm bore a faded tattoo, Force Recon insignia, the words below it worn enough by time to require knowing what you were looking for. He had spent 22 years doing things the government had no current interest in discussing in any formal venue. He heard the tapping. He registered the pattern with the part of his brain that certain kinds of service wire into a permanent on position. His eyes moved to the source, the man at the corner table, hands flat, looking at a menu, and then moved, without changing expression, away. Silas picked up his mug, took a sip, set it down, stood. He walked toward the restrooms, which required passing Caleb's table. He didn't stop, didn't look down, kept walking. But as he passed, his voice came out in a register pitched for a range of approximately 18 inches. "Need something, son?" "Phone," Caleb said. Same range. "Fast." Silas walked on without altering his pace. He was inside the narrow hallway to the restrooms for 45 seconds. When he came back out, he walked past Caleb's table again, heading back to his stool, and a disposable phone slid from his hand to the table edge with the practiced naturalness of a man who has spent decades moving things between people without anyone being the wiser. Caleb took the phone without looking at it. Dialed a number from memory. 11 digits, not a local exchange, not any exchange that appeared in any directory accessible to the general public. Let it ring. Busy signal. 4th of July. The emergency coordination lines would be flooded with parade logistics, fireworks permits, the kind of administrative noise that a federal holiday generates in proportion to its size. He tried again. Still busy. He looked at the clock. 10:43 a.m. 17 minutes. It was into this calculation that Fletcher Donovan arrived at Caleb's table. He didn't come alone exactly. He brought the full weight of his social context with him, the ambient awareness of the room that followed his movements, the way a room pays attention to whoever is accustomed to being paid attention to. He stopped beside the table and stood with his hands in his blazer pockets and looked down at Caleb with the benevolent expression of a man preparing to do someone a favor they didn't request. "Look," he said, "I'm going to be straight with you. Otis is a good guy, and he's trying to run a clean operation here. The holiday rush, people with allergies, the whole thing." He reached into his interior blazer pocket and produced a folded $20 bill, setting it on the edge of the table. "That covers your coffee and then some. You take the dog outside, enjoy the parade. Everybody has a nice 4th. Sound good?" Caleb looked at the $20 bill, looked up at Fletcher, said nothing for a moment. "I haven't finished my coffee," he said. Fletcher's expression adjusted in a way that was almost imperceptible, the small recalibration of a man who expects a certain kind of resistance and is mildly surprised by a different kind. "I understand that," he said, patient in the way that powerful people are patient when they consider themselves to be in the right. "But I think we both know it's easier for everyone if—" "I haven't finished my coffee," Caleb said again. The words were identical. The tone was identical. What was different was the quality of the space after them, the way they landed without invitation for continuation. Fletcher looked at the man across from him for the first time with something approaching actual assessment rather than assumption. What he found was a face that gave him nothing. Not hostility, not deference, not the embarrassed compliance he had expected from a man in a worn flannel shirt sitting alone in a corner. Just a pair of dark eyes that appeared to be doing something other than responding to him. Fletcher picked up the 20 and put it back in his pocket. "Your call," he said pleasantly, and returned to his table. Dahlia watched him return and raised her eyebrows. Fletcher made a small gesture with one hand. Dismissive, amused. "Some people," he said, and she laughed. And Blake Garrett at the end of the booth shook his head with the comfortable contempt of someone who has never needed to question the consensus he exists within. If you've ever been judged before you even opened your mouth, this story is for you. Or Caleb Hayes walked into that diner with a prosthetic leg, a retired war dog, and zero desire to prove anything to anyone. But what Rex just detected in that corner, that changes everything. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because what happens in the next few minutes inside Liberty Diner is something you will not want to miss. Stay with us. Blake Garrett was 39, broad across the shoulders in the way that used to mean something and now mostly meant he'd been athletic in his 20s, and he had the habit of standing up from tables in a way that announced his intention to fill whatever space he was moving into. He crossed to Caleb's table the way he crossed most spaces, as though its existing contents were temporary and subject to revision. He pulled out the chair opposite Caleb and sat in it without asking, placed his beer on Caleb's table, leaned back. "So," he said, "where'd you serve?" The question carried no genuine curiosity. It was a pry bar, a tool for opening something rather than a door into actual conversation. Rex's head lifted slightly from the floor. Not alarm. Measurement. "Does it matter?" Caleb said. "I'm just making conversation." Blake's eyes moved to the prosthetic and then away with the theatrical casualness of someone trying to appear like they didn't look. "My cousin was in the Army. Did 2 tours. He doesn't really talk about it either." A pause, calibrated for effect. "Course, he's got a good job now, so..." Caleb said nothing. Blake took a long pull from his beer, comfortable in the silence, in the way that people are comfortable when they believe they're controlling it. "I'm just saying, you've got to adapt, right? Life moves on. Plenty of guys figure it out." Another glance at the leg. The glance lasted a half-second too long. "Thank you for your service and all that," he added, in the tone people use when they want credit for saying the words and none of the weight that should accompany them. Caleb looked at him. 2 full seconds. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger, not contempt. Something more like the look of a man watching weather on a horizon and filing information about it. Then he looked back out the window. Blake waited for something more. There was nothing more. He stood up from the chair, picked up his beer, and walked back to his table with his chin slightly higher than it had been when he sat down. His departure was visible to the room as a victory, because he had chosen that framing, and no counterfactual was offered. Floyd, watching through the kitchen service window, turned back to the flat-top grill without expression. Caleb's right hand found the edge of the table again. This time, instead of tapping, it settled there. The ring finger had a slight lateral deviation at the second knuckle, the kind of old break that was set in the field rather than a clinic. The scar across the dorsum of the hand ran from the base of the index finger to the outer edge of the wrist. Both details were visible. Neither was commented upon. Rex shifted his weight and his head turned, fractionally, back toward the corner table. The man in the corner, Jasper Slade, checked his watch for the first time. Caleb saw it, registered it, filed it against everything else he'd been filing. A man who has spent 18 years reading human behavior in environments where misreading it has permanent consequences learns to hear what people aren't saying. The slight adjustment of posture after checking the watch, a tiny settling, the way a person settles when a timer has confirmed something expected. The hands returning to the lap with a new, small quality of decision in them. The eyes moving to the window, where the first elements of the parade were now visible, crepe-wrapped bicycle floats and a brass section doing its warm-up repetitions on the sidewalk. 10:47 a.m., 13 minutes. Caleb picked up the disposable phone, tried the number again. 4 rings this time. Progress, and then a general voicemail for a federal coordination office. He did not leave a message. He put the phone down. looked at Ivy Coleman, who was navigating the aisle between tables with a tray of plates, and caught her eye with the specific quality of attention that communicates urgency without signaling it to the room. She finished delivering the plates, came to his table. He said quietly, "The number I need. Non-emergency line for the county sheriff's department." "Can you look it up?" Ivy set her tray under her arm, pulled out her phone, opened it. Then it rang again. The same Cedar Falls Elementary number. And she looked at him with the apologetic helplessness of someone trapped between two forms of urgency. "I'm sorry, I have to go," he said. She went. He watched Jasper Slade look at the window, look at his bag. The bell above the door opened again, and Deputy Ronan walked in. He was young for the position, late 20s, careful in the way of someone still calibrating the gap between training and application, his uniform neat and his expression carrying the particular alertness of a man who has been dispatched to handle a minor situation and wants to handle it correctly. Otis materialized at his elbow within seconds, speaking in the compressed, efficient register of someone who has been waiting for this moment. Ronan nodded, looked across the room toward the corner table where Caleb sat, walked over. "Sir," he said, standing beside the table, "I've had a complaint about the dog. I'm going to need you to—" "The man at the corner table," Caleb said, without looking away from the window. "Dark jacket, bag under the chair. I need you to run him." Ronan paused. The request didn't fit the dispatch. "Sir, I'm here about the—" "I know why you're here." Now Caleb looked up at him. "I need you to do what I just told you before you deal with me. Please." There was something in the word please, the way it was deployed, with precision rather than appeal, that made Ronan hesitate for a fraction of a second. He looked toward the corner. The man in the dark jacket was sitting quietly, doing nothing observable. "I don't have cause to run someone who's sitting in a diner," Ronan said. Caleb reached into the chest pocket of his flannel shirt and produced a folded piece of paper, a business card, handwritten on the back, the print on the front so worn as to be illegible at a glance. He slid it across the table to Ronan. "Call that number. Tell them Delta 7. Tell them you're at Liberty Diner in Cedar Falls." He looked back out the window. "Then come back and tell me what they say." Ronan looked at the card. The handwriting was exact, not the cramped script of haste, but the compressed clarity of someone trained to write quickly in poor light. He picked up the card. "And if I don't? Then you will have made your choice," Caleb said simply. The answer sat in the air. Ronan pocketed the card. He did not make the call yet. He turned to address the situation Otis had described, which was why he was here, which was the orderly thing to do. But the card was in his pocket. From the large booth, Fletcher watched the deputy's arrival with the satisfied expression of a board chairman watching procedural machinery confirm his decision. He caught Dahlia's eye and tilted his head very slightly toward the corner table where Caleb sat. Dahlia raised her mimosa glass a fraction. Mission accomplished. What neither of them noticed, what nobody in the room noticed except two people, was that Rex had risen from the floor. Not abruptly, not with growling or display, simply the dog was lying down, and then the dog was standing, and he was standing with his body oriented toward the exit, and his weight distributed across all 4 feet in the particular configuration of a working dog that has finished deliberating and arrived at a conclusion. He walked, not trotted, not rushed, simply walked, to the space between Jasper Slade's table and the door, and sat down. The movement was so unhurried and so silent that it took the room a few seconds to process it. Dahlia was the first to notice because Rex passed close to her table, and she pulled her leg slightly back as he went by. Fletcher looked up, Blake looked over, Otis from behind the counter went still. Jasper Slade looked down at the dog sitting in the space between his table and the door. Then he looked up, and for the first time, his eyes moved to Caleb's table. The two men looked at each other across 22 feet of Liberty Diner with the particular quality of people who understand the same language and are now conducting a conversation in it. Ronan was standing beside Caleb's table, saying something about documentation, about the rules, about how if he would just cooperate with the process, and Caleb, without looking away from Jasper Slade, said clearly, "That dog is not sitting there because I told him to." Ronan stopped. Silas, from the counter stool, unfolded himself to standing. He did it slowly, with the deliberate gravity of someone who has gotten up from chairs in many difficult rooms and knows how to do it in a way that takes up exactly as much space as is required. He looked at Ronan. "Deputy," he said. The word had the quality of an address, not a greeting. That animal performed final indication. Do you know what that means? Ronan looked at the old man. Sir, it means the dog has confirmed the presence of something that should not be in this room. Silas's voice was level and entirely without theater. I did 22 years force recon. I know the behavior. Call the number the man gave you. The quality of the room changed. It changed the way a room changes when a piece of information reorders the furniture of what everyone was assuming. Not loudly, not with drama, but with the sudden structural shift of a floor settling. Eyes moved from Silas to Rex to the corner table to the bag under the chair. Fletcher Donovan looked at the bag. Blake Garrett looked at the bag. Dahlia Walsh looked at the bag and put her mimosa glass down. Ronan took out the business card, took out his phone. He dialed. The call connected on the first ring. No ringing at all, just a click and a voice. A voice that did not identify itself by name, rank, or department, but which had the quality of a voice that does not need to. Ronan said, Delta 7. 3 seconds of silence. Then, who is calling this number? Deputy Ronan, Cedar Falls County Sheriff's Department. I'm at Liberty Diner, Main Street, Cedar Falls, and don't let anyone leave that building. The voice had changed register entirely, from assessment to instruction in 2 syllables. Do you understand? No one leaves. We are 6 minutes out. Ronan lowered the phone. He stood very still for a moment. Then he looked at Jasper Slade, at the bag under the chair, at Rex sitting in the space between Slade and the exit with the quiet certainty of an animal that has done this before and will do it correctly. Then he looked at Caleb Hayes, at the flannel shirt, the worn jeans, the prosthetic leg visible below the table. The man who had asked for 15 minutes and been given grief about a dog, and had sat in the corner and said nothing and done nothing, and watched and calculated and tapped Morse code on a diner table and handed over a classified number to a county deputy at 10:47 in the morning. Sir, Ronan said. It was not the same word he had used before. The weight had changed. Caleb was already standing. He moved differently when he stood, the prosthetic accommodating the transition with a smoothness that spoke of years of adaptation, weight shifting through a body that had reconstructed its mechanics around a new geometry. He stepped away from the table with the unhurried certainty of someone who has already decided everything he needs to decide. Fletcher Donovan said loudly from his booth, What is happening right now? Nobody answered him. Jasper Slade looked at Rex, at Caleb, at the door. In the assessment Slade was conducting, Caleb Hayes was the central variable, the thing that didn't fit, the element that had been present since 1041 and had not been neutralized despite every available social mechanism being deployed against him. His right hand moved toward the inside of his jacket. Sir, Caleb's voice had changed, not louder, sharper, the way a blade is sharper without being larger. The quality of command, not authority requested, but authority issued. Take your hand out of your jacket slowly. The diner went completely silent. Not the polite silence of people minding their conversation. The absolute silence of 28 people receiving simultaneously the same signal that something real is happening in this room and the ordinary rules of breakfast do not apply. Rex rose from his sitting position. He did not growl. He did not lunge. He simply rose and redistributed his weight with the quiet mechanical precision of a 70-pound piece of machinery coming fully online. His eyes were on Slade. His posture communicated without ambiguity the specific promise of a working dog that has been trained to fulfill it. Slade's hand came out of his jacket. In it was a phone, a burner, the screen lit, a number already dialed, but not yet sent. The configuration of his thumb over the call button communicated more than anything he could have said. You know what this is, Slade said. His voice was flat and colorless, not theatrical, not unhinged. The voice of a man in the middle of a calculation. I know exactly what it is, Caleb said. He was 4 feet away now, having closed the distance without anyone being able to identify the specific moment the distance changed. I've disarmed 17 devices in the last 8 years. I know what's in that bag, and I know what that phone is connected to. A pause. And I know you haven't sent it, which means you're still deciding. Slade's eyes moved across the room, the diner full of people, the parade outside, the small faces of children visible through the window, sitting on a float with American flags. They won't hear it, Caleb said quietly. If you do this in here, in this room, with 28 people and a parade outside, nobody will ever hear why. Whatever you came here to say, whatever point you're trying to make, it gets buried under the event. That's what always happens. His voice had not risen. It had, if anything, gotten quieter, carrying the particular authority of complete certainty. But if you put the phone down, we have this conversation a different way. Slade looked at him, at the prosthetic, at Rex, at the man who had been dismissed by this room for the last 45 minutes and had not raised his voice or made a scene or called for attention or asked for anything except 15 minutes and a borrowed phone. "You've been through it," Slade said. It was not quite a question. "I've been through it," Caleb said. The clock above the counter read 10:53 a.m. 7 minutes. Slade's thumb moved away from the call button. What happened next happened quickly enough that several people in the room could not reconstruct the sequence in its correct order when asked to describe it afterward. Caleb moved, stepped and turned in a single motion, weight through the prosthetic in a controlled transfer that absorbed and redirected the momentum, one arm coming across to lock Slade's wrist with a grip that controlled the phone without wrenching it. A technique designed to contain rather than to damage, executed with the economy of someone who has done similar things enough times that the body no longer needs to think through the individual components. The phone hit the floor. Rex was already at the bag and standing over it in the final indication position, nose down, still, the professional confirmation of what he had known since 10:41 a.m. Deputy Ronan was moving. Outside, a child laughed at something on a parade float. A brass section hit a chord. The flag of the United States moved in a light July wind, the same wind that moved through the open door of Liberty Diner as Ronan called for backup. And 3 cars came over the radio, and Silas, from his stool at the counter, let out a long breath that he appeared to have been holding for several minutes. Fletcher Donovan was sitting completely still in his booth. The mimosa in front of Dahlia had a ring of condensation on the table, and she was looking at it instead of the room. Blake Garrett had his elbows on the table and his face in his hands, in the posture of a man doing arithmetic he does not like the answer to. Ivy Coleman came out from the back hallway with her phone to her ear and stopped when she took in the room. Her eyes went to Caleb, to Rex, positioned over the bag, to Slade against the wall with Ronan's hand on his shoulder, to the absolute stillness of 28 people in a room who had been 7 minutes ago eating breakfast. She lowered her phone. Liam appeared in the kitchen doorway behind her, 7 years old, eyes wide, taking in the scene with the particular unguarded receptivity of children who have not yet learned to manage their reactions to significant things. His eyes found Rex. Rex, from across the room, turned his head, looked at the boy. His tail moved once, slow, deliberate, and then returned to stillness. Liam took a step toward him. Ivy caught him by the shoulder. "Stay," she said. "The dog looked at me," Liam said. "I know," she said. Outside, the first of the black SUVs pulled onto Main Street, moving against the direction of the parade, pushing through the crowd with lights going. The parade didn't stop. It moved around the vehicles the way water moves around an obstruction. And the people on the sidewalk who noticed the FBI plates looked at them and then back at the floats with the fundamental human preference for the more festive thing. 2 agents came through the door, then another. Then a woman in a dark vest who moved with the purposeful economy of someone running a situation rather than responding to it. She was 40, sharp-featured, wearing her authority the way competent people wear it, without announcement. Agent Hazel looked at the room, at Slade in Ronan's custody, at the bag, at Rex still in position, at Caleb Hayes standing beside the corner table in a worn flannel shirt with his hands at his sides. She walked directly to him, not to Ronan, not to the bag, to him. "Delta 7, she said. "Report. Target contained," Caleb said. "Devices intact in the bag, undeployed, no injuries. Dead man's trigger was a phone recovered on the floor. You've got a clean scene." 2 technicians in protective gear were already moving toward the bag. The room watched with the concentrated attention of people observing something they will describe for the rest of their lives. Agent Hazel looked at Caleb for a long moment, at the prosthetic, at Rex, who had stepped back from the bag when the technicians moved in, knowing his job was done, releasing the scene with the clean professionalism of an animal that understands completion. She looked at the flannel shirt, the worn jeans, the man who had been in this room for 52 minutes, and had been offered $20 to leave it. The device, she said to the lead technician, IED, improvised but sophisticated. Blast radius would have been approximately 200 feet. A pause. The parade route runs directly in front of this building. Fletcher Donovan heard this from his booth. His face went through several things in rapid succession and settled on the white, simplified expression of a man who has just understood something he cannot revise. Hazel looked back at Caleb. How did you know? Caleb looked at Rex. He knew, Caleb said. Hazel was quiet for a moment. Then, Washington's going to want to talk to you. I'm retired. Slade isn't working alone. The room was very quiet. Caleb looked at the window where the parade was continuing its cheerful processional outside. The children on the floats, the flags, the brass band doing its patriotic work in the July morning sun. He looked for a long time. Then he sat back down at his table. Ivy appeared beside him without being summoned, carrying a coffee carafe. She refilled his cup, set down a plate of pancakes not from an order, because he hadn't ordered, and beside it, a bowl of water for Rex. Caleb looked at the plate, looked up at her. You hadn't eaten, she said. He said nothing. Rex came and positioned himself beside the table, pressed against Caleb's left leg, and lay down with his chin on the floor. Caleb placed one hand briefly on the dog's head. One hand. Brief. He picked up his fork. Outside, Cedar Falls celebrated the 4th of July without knowing what it was celebrating. Right now, Caleb Hayes is the only person in that diner who knows what's sitting under that corner table, and he can't make a single move without tipping off the threat. No phone, no backup. 30 people around him, and not one of them knows. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to see this. We're not done yet. The biggest moment is still coming. The pancakes were good. This was not a thing Caleb Hayes noted with any particular ceremony, but it registered. The way small, uncomplicated pleasures register when you have spent a significant portion of your adult life in places where the food was either functional or absent. Ivy Coleman cooked them thick, with enough butter on the griddle that the edges went crisp, and she had put a small pitcher of real maple syrup on the table, rather than the plastic bottle of corn syrup composite that most diners defaulted to. He ate with the methodical attention of someone who has learned not to waste things. Around him, Liberty Diner was becoming a different kind of place than it had been 40 minutes ago. The FBI technicians moved through it with the quiet efficiency of professionals transforming a civilian space into a working scene. Portable equipment cases open on the floor, communication equipment establishing secure channels, the kind of organized purpose that has no interest in the feelings of the room it occupies. The bag from under Jasper Slade's table had been moved outside to the containment unit that arrived in the second vehicle, and its departure had left a kind of negative space at the corner table that everyone in the room was being careful not to look at directly. Jasper Slade himself had been escorted out through the back, past the kitchen, past Floyd's flat-top grill and the rack of tickets for orders that would not be filled now, out through the delivery entrance to a waiting vehicle. He had not spoken after the moment at the table. He had gone with the silent cooperation of a man who has run his calculation to its conclusion and found the arithmetic conclusive. Deputy Ronan stood near the door with his notepad open, doing what law enforcement does in the immediate aftermath of something that exceeds its jurisdiction. Documenting, waiting for direction, trying to make himself useful to people with more context than he currently possessed. His eyes kept returning to Caleb's table, not with suspicion anymore, with something closer to the expression of a man working through a problem he cannot quite formulate yet. Silas was back on his counter stool. He had not been asked to leave, and nobody with any authority in the room had looked at him as though asking him to leave was a productive use of their time. He held his coffee mug in both hands and watched the proceedings with the settled patience of someone who has seen enough versions of this particular kind of aftermath to know that the useful thing is to be still and let it resolve. Floyd had come out of the kitchen fully. He stood near the pass-through window with his tray tucked under his arm and his apron folded over one forearm, and he was watching Caleb eat pancakes with the expression of a man reviewing his own recent history and finding the accounting uncomfortable. The tray moved from one arm to the other, back again. At the large booth, the geometry had changed. Fletcher Donovan sat with his elbows on the table and his fingers laced together in front of his face in the posture of prayer or concentrated thinking, or both. The cream-colored blazer that had announced itself so confidently 2 hours ago now appeared merely expensive rather than authoritative, the distinction mattering in a way it hadn't before. Dahlia Walsh had put her phone away. She was looking at the tablecloth. Blake Garrett had his arms crossed and was looking at the window where the parade was still moving along Main Street, the brass band now playing a march that drifted into the diner in disconnected fragments. None of them spoke. It was Agent Hazel who broke the particular silence of the booth. She came to it not aggressively, not confrontationally, with the neutral purposefulness of someone collecting information she needs in order to complete a picture. She set a small recording device on the edge of the table and looked at Fletcher. "Mr. Donovan," she said, "I need to take statements from everyone who is present. Can you tell me where you were sitting when the incident began and whether you observed anything that struck you as unusual in the behavior of the individual at the corner table?" Fletcher looked up. There were several things moving across his face. The reflex of authority reasserting itself, the competing pressure of what he knew about how he had spent the last hour, the practiced social intelligence of a man who understands that how he handles the next 30 seconds will follow him. "I was at this booth," he said. I wasn't watching him particularly." "Were you aware of the other patron?" Hazel meant Caleb. "The individual with the service animal?" A pause. "I was." "And your interactions with him this morning, and can you walk me through those?" Fletcher's jaw moved slightly. "I asked him to leave," he said. The words came out even, measured, carrying their own weight without him needing to add to them. He was too intelligent not to understand what they meant in the current context. Hazel made a note, said nothing evaluative, moved on to Dahlia, who answered in shorter, tighter sentences than her usual register. Then to Blake, who spoke with the chastened economy of a man who has run out of the kind of confidence that requires an audience. From his corner table, Caleb watched none of this. He finished the pancakes, refilled his own coffee from the carafe Ivy had left on the table. Rex had eaten from the bowl and was now lying across the base of Caleb's feet. Not trained position, just preference. The dog choosing its own geography once the work was done. Liam came out of the kitchen a second time. This time, Ivy didn't catch him. She was behind the counter speaking with one of the agents, her hands wrapped around her own coffee mug, and Liam crossed the diner floor with the quiet determination of a 7-year-old who has identified the most interesting thing in the room and intends to reach it. He stopped beside Rex, looked at the dog, looked at Caleb. "Is he tired?" Liam asked. "He did a lot of work this morning," Caleb said. Liam considered this. "What kind of work?" "The kind that matters." The boy sat cross-legged on the floor beside Rex without asking, in the unself-conscious way of children who have not yet learned that sitting on the floor in public spaces is unusual. Rex lifted his head and looked at him, sniffed the small hand that was extended tentatively, allowed the hand to settle on the back of his neck. "My mom said you used to be in the military," Liam said. "A while ago," Caleb said. "Is that how your leg got hurt?" Caleb looked at the boy. The question was asked with the unguarded directness of someone who doesn't yet know that certain questions aren't asked, and there was nothing in it but genuine curiosity, the same quality with which a child asks how airplanes stay up or why the sky is a specific color. "Yes," Caleb said. "Did it hurt?" "For a while." Liam thought about this with the serious attentiveness that children apply to information they intend to store carefully. "But you still came here today," he said. It wasn't quite a question. It was an observation about a sequence of events that he was trying to arrange into something that made sense. "I needed coffee," Caleb said. Liam looked at the coffee mug, at the empty plate, at Rex under his hand. "I think Rex needed to be here too," he said. Caleb said nothing, but something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, not one. And he looked out the window at the parade for a moment before looking back at the boy. "You might be right," he said. Ivy appeared at the edge of the table. She looked at Liam on the floor, at Rex allowing himself to be petted with the patient benevolence of a dog that has earned its rest, at her son's complete absorption in the moment. She opened her mouth to call him back to the kitchen, then closed it. "He wants to work with K9s, she said instead, to Caleb. The information was offered as a small disclosure, slightly embarrassed in the way parents are embarrassed by their children's ambitions when they don't know how those ambitions will be received. "That's good work," Caleb said. "Is it hard to train them?" "The dog isn't the hard part." He looked at Rex, who had rested his chin on Liam's knee and closed his eyes. "The hard part is learning to trust what they're telling you. Most people hear it and second-guess it because it doesn't fit what they think they know. Ivy was quiet for a moment. The observation sat between them with an application that neither of them acknowledged directly. "Is that what happened today?" she asked. "Everyone second-guessed it?" "Everyone except Silas," Caleb said. She looked toward the counter where the old man was finishing his coffee with the unhurried deliberation of someone who has nowhere he needs to be and has decided that today, that is the correct place to be. "He's been coming in here for years," she said. "I never knew." "Most people don't advertise it," Caleb said. "The ones who are most certain, they don't need to." Ronan crossed the room and stopped at the edge of the table. He had his notepad in one hand and the business card in the other. The one Caleb had given him, the handwriting on the back. He held it as though he wasn't sure whether to offer it back or keep it. "I owe you an apology," he said. Caleb looked up at him. "For doing your job?" "For doing it badly," Ronan said. He was being precise, which was the more difficult and more accurate thing. "I had information in front of me and I didn't act on it because it didn't fit the story I'd already decided on." He looked at the card. "A man told me something was wrong, and I treated it like a complaint about nothing." "You called the number," Caleb said, "because an old man used the words force recon, and I finally paid attention." Ronan's voice carried the particular self-assessment of someone who is not making excuses. "That shouldn't have been what it took." Caleb looked at him for a moment. "You're young," he said, not dismissively, as a statement of temporal fact that carries both limitation and possibility within it. "You'll remember this." Ronan looked at him, then nodded. Once, the movement carrying more weight than its size suggested. "Yes, sir," he said, in the register that word occupies when it is meant. He moved away. Caleb turned the coffee mug in his hands. Agent Hazel completed her circuit of the room and returned to his table. She sat down across from him, not with the performance of someone claiming territory, but with the practical directness of someone who has several things to discuss and limited time in which to discuss them. She set a manila folder on the table between them. Closed. She did not open it. "The device was sophisticated," she said, "is not field improvised. Manufactured components sourced from 4 different suppliers across 3 states, assembled with a level of technical knowledge that we're going to be working to trace for some time." "He wasn't working from a manual," Caleb said. "No, the triggering mechanism in particular, the dead man's configuration on the phone, that's not self-taught. Someone taught him." She paused. "Someone who knew what they were doing." Caleb said nothing. "We've been tracking Slade for 6 weeks, Hazel continued. "He changed location 3 times in the last 24 hours. We lost his vehicle at 0700 this morning. When he switched to a rental we hadn't flagged. By the time we reacquired the trail, you'd already contained him." She looked at him. "How did you end up in Cedar Falls today?" "I was passing through. On the 4th of July, when the largest public gathering in Cedar County is centered on the route where your target chose to position himself." She held his gaze without pressure, the way very good interrogators hold it, creating space rather than filling it. "Rex needed a walk," Caleb said. The corner of Hazel's mouth moved in a way that might have been the beginning of something. "The last 3 times your name appeared in a non-classified context," she said. "It was adjacent to incidents that were later confirmed as threat interdictions. Once in Billings, once in Jacksonville, once in a truck stop outside Flagstaff that we're still officially characterizing as a gas leak." She was watching him. "You have a pattern, Lieutenant Commander." "I'm retired," Caleb said. "You keep saying that. It keeps being true." She opened the folder now, placed a single sheet of paper on the table, face down. Did not flip it. "Washington sent this before I left the field office this morning, before we knew Slade would be here, before the incident." She looked at him. "It was addressed to you." Caleb looked at the paper, at the folder, back at Hazel. "How did Washington know where I was?" The question sat between them. Hazel let it sit. "That," she said, "is one of several things I'd very much like to understand." She stood. "The paper is yours. I'd ask that you read it before you leave Cedar Falls." She picked up the folder and left the sheet on the table, face down. "We'll need your formal statement before you go." She moved away to speak with her technicians. Caleb looked at the face-down paper. Rex lifted his head from Liam's knee and looked at the table, sniffed the air once, looked at Caleb with the particular attentiveness of an animal who understands that something significant is on the other side of a decision. Caleb turned the paper over. He read it. His face did not change. He read it a second time, more slowly. Then he folded it once precisely along the crease it had arrived with, and placed it in his chest pocket alongside where the business card had been. He sat for a moment with both hands flat on the table. Outside, the parade band was playing a slower number now. Not a march, something with more weight to it, a hymn converted to brass. The sound came through the glass in the particular way that music sounds when it is being played for a large crowd on a clear morning. Full and slightly remote, the way things sound when you are slightly outside the event rather than inside it. Liam had fallen asleep on the floor against Rex's side. Ivy saw this from behind the counter and made the face that parents make when their children do something that is both inconvenient and too exactly right to correct. She came to the table, looked at her son, looked at the dog who had adjusted his position to accommodate the sleeping boy without any apparent inconvenience, and sat down across from Caleb. "He'll be mortified when he wakes up," she said. "He's 7. He thinks he's very grown." "He asked good questions," Caleb said. "He asks questions about everything." She looked at her son. His father was Army. 2 tours, then a desk job, then a new family somewhere else. She said it simply, the way people state facts they have made peace with by the mechanism of saying them often enough. Liam never met him, really. But he fixates on this military thing, the history of it. The dogs especially. "Good fixation," Caleb said. "Is it? I don't—" She paused, tried something different. "I don't know how to talk to him about it, about what it actually means. I grew up here. The closest I've been to any of it is the VFW dinners and the parades." She looked at the window. "And this, apparently—" "You handled it correctly this morning," Caleb said. She looked at him. "I let you sit down, that's all. That was the thing that was needed." She was quiet for a moment. Something in the simplicity of the exchange was difficult in the way that simple things sometimes are. The way a plain statement of fact is harder to receive than a complicated one because there is nowhere to put the argument. "I didn't know," she said finally. "I didn't know who you were. I just thought—" She looked at her son, at Rex. "I thought you looked tired, and like you weren't going to cause any trouble." "I wasn't going to," Caleb said, "except the trouble that was already here." She laughed, briefly, a small sound, but unguarded. The first fully unguarded thing he had heard in the diner all morning that wasn't the noise of a crowd. "Where do you go after this?" she asked. He looked at his chest pocket. "I'm not sure yet." "Because of the paper?" He looked at her. She met his eyes without flinching. "I saw you read it," she said. "Your face didn't change, but something else did." He considered this. There was a quality in Ivy Coleman that he had been cataloging since she walked past Otis Briggs to offer a corner table to a stranger with a prosthetic and a dog. Not naivete, nothing close to it, but the kind of directness that comes from having limited patience for the management of appearances. It was a quality he recognized. "Something I was supposed to be done with," he said, "may not be done with me." She nodded, didn't push. The restraint was its own thing, the recognition that there is information people carry that isn't available to be asked for, and that the decent response to that is acknowledgement rather than excavation. She stood up, collected the empty plate and the carafe, and then stopped. "For what it's worth," she said, "you were done with it. It's not the same thing as it being done with you?" She looked at Rex, still serving as Liam's pillow. "He seems to think so too." She went back to the counter. At the large booth, something was happening. Fletcher Donovan had straightened in his seat. He was looking across the room at Caleb's table with an expression that had resolved itself through several intermediate stages into something that didn't have a comfortable name. Not quite guilt, not quite regret. The more complex and specifically architectural feeling of a man who has spent a morning building something that turns out to have been constructed facing the wrong direction. He murmured something to Dahlia. Dahlia said something back. Blake was looking at his phone with the concentration of a man who would rather be somewhere else. Fletcher stood up. He crossed the diner floor in a direct line. He didn't meander, didn't approach from an angle, didn't bring the group's social dynamics with him. He came alone and stood at the edge of Caleb's table and said, "May I sit down?" The echo of it registered in the room before it registered on his face. The precise inversion of the question that had been asked at the door 2 hours ago. Asked now by the man who had most vigorously ensured it couldn't be answered easily then. Caleb looked at him. "It's a free country," Caleb said. "That's what the parade's about." Fletcher sat. He put his hands on the table, palms down, in the open posture of someone not negotiating. He looked at the table surface for a moment before looking up. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't. I want to explain—" "You don't need to," Caleb said, not harshly, not generously, with the clean precision of someone who has already allocated this conversation exactly as much significance as it deserves. What happened this morning happened. You made choices based on what you thought you were looking at. Most people do. Fletcher's jaw worked. That's more charitable than I deserve. It's accurate, Caleb said. Charitable would be pretending there's no lesson in it. A pause. Fletcher looked at his own hands. What would you have done, he said, if it had just been a normal morning? If there had been nothing wrong in that corner? Caleb looked at the window, at the tail end of the parade making its way down Main Street, the final floats going by, children's faces turned toward the crowd with the guileless pleasure of being part of something. I'd have drunk my coffee, he said, paid for it, left, without saying anything. What would there have been to say? Fletcher looked at him, at the prosthetic visible at the table's edge, at the worn shirt and the worn jeans and the man inside them who had come into this room as a problem to be solved and had turned out to be the only reason the room still contained everyone who was currently in it. I don't know what to do with this, Fletcher said. The honesty of it, the unmanaged quality of the admission, was the first genuinely unstructured thing Caleb had heard from him all morning. You don't have to do anything with it right now, Caleb said, but at some point you will. And when that happens, the only useful thing is to be honest about what it was. Fletcher was quiet. Caleb picked up his coffee mug. There are 400 people outside on that street right now, he said. Families, kids, people who got up this morning and put on their best clothes to watch a parade in their hometown. They're not thinking about any of this. They shouldn't have to. He looked at Fletcher. That's the whole point. That's the thing we tried to keep intact. Fletcher looked out the window, at the street. He swallowed. Did you know it was going to work out? No, Caleb said. Were you scared? Caleb considered this question with the seriousness it deserved. I was counting, he said. There's a difference. Fletcher sat with this for a moment. Then he nodded. Not the confident, decisive nod of a man accustoming a room to his conclusions, but the smaller, more private nod of a person absorbing something. He stood up. I don't know your name, he said. You don't need it, Caleb said. Fletcher looked at him for a long moment, then he turned and went back to his booth. Silas slid off his counter stool. He moved with the particular unhurried gravity he always moved with, carrying his coffee mug across the room and stopping at Caleb's table. He looked down at Liam still asleep against Rex. At Rex, who acknowledged Silas with a single slow blink and returned to the serious business of being a dog bed. Good dog, Silas said. He wasn't speaking to Caleb or to Rex in particular. It was the kind of statement you make to a room rather than a specific audience, the way you might comment on good weather or a clean piece of work. He's the best I've ever handled, Caleb said. Where'd you get him? Afghanistan, 08, 13 weeks in country together before he told me about an IED in a culvert that saved the lives of 7 people. Caleb looked at Rex. We've been figuring it out together since then. Silas sat down across from him, the chair still warm from Fletcher's departure. He set his mug down, looked at Caleb with the forthright assessment of a man who has spent decades reading other people as a professional necessity and hasn't lost the habit. You were running clean, he said. From the moment you walked in, I watched the whole thing. I know you did. Force recon, I told the deputy. That seemed to get through. It got through, Caleb said. Silas turned his coffee mug on the table, the slow rotation of a man thinking. The number you had me dial. The Delta 7 thing. He looked up. That's not a county coordination line. No. You've been running assets since you retired. I haven't been running anything, Caleb said. I've been fixing appliances and taking Rex for walks and trying to remember what quiet feels like. And the incidents. Caleb looked at him. Silas had the patient expression of a man who has done this before, drawn a thread from an unwilling source, not by pulling but by simply holding the end and waiting. It finds me, Caleb said. It always does, with certain people, Silas said. The ones who can't walk past something wrong. It's not a virtue. It's a wiring problem. He said this without judgment. The observation of a man describing a condition he recognizes from the inside. You don't go looking, but you can't go not finding. Caleb said nothing. Silas looked at the chest pocket where the folded paper was. Washington, he said. Not a question. Apparently. You going to go? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Rex adjusted beneath Liam's weight, the sleeping boy shifting slightly, and Caleb reached down and steadied the boy's shoulder with one hand without looking. The automatic gesture of someone managing a situation he didn't plan for and has no objection to. He withdrew his hand. He told me Slade wasn't working alone, he said. Of course he wasn't, Silas said without surprise. Whatever is connected to that, it's not finished. It never is, Silas said. That's the thing they don't tell you at the beginning. They let you think there's a finish line. Then you've been doing it long enough to know there isn't one. He picked up his mug. The question is never whether there's more. The question is whether you're the right person for the next part of it. Caleb looked out the window. The parade had ended. Main Street was transitioning from processional to celebration. People spreading out across the road with coolers and chairs, the particular organized informality of an American small town on its best holiday. Flags everywhere. The clean July light coming through the windows of Liberty Diner and landing on the black and white tile floor in rectangles that moved with the breeze from the door. "I came here for coffee," Caleb said. "I know," Silas said. And then something else happened. "It always does." Silas turned his mug again. "I haven't worked in 23 years, he said. "Retired, settled, 12 years at that counter stool, more mornings than I can count." He looked at the room, at the FBI equipment, at the people still processing what they had witnessed, at Ivy behind the counter moving through the familiar rhythms of her job, with the anchored practicality of someone who has decided the world is what you make functional in it. "I think about it sometimes, whether I could still, whether it would mean the same thing." "You did fine this morning," Caleb said. "I handed you a phone and spoke 12 words to a deputy," Silas said. "That's not the same as what you did." "It was exactly what was needed," Caleb said. "The right person in the right place doing the right specific thing. That's the whole architecture of it. Not everyone needs to do everything. Everyone needs to do their part." Silas looked at him, at the prosthetic, at the lines on the face of a man who is 41 and looks like something else entirely, depending on the angle and the light. "They gave you medals," he said. "A few. You wear them?" "No." Silas nodded, as though this confirmed something. The ones who wear them most are usually the ones who needed them most to feel like something happened. The ones who don't. He left it there. Caleb said, "The thing that happened doesn't need the medal." Silas looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and produced something. A challenge coin, the kind that military branches mint to mark service and relationship, and the specific knowledge that someone stood in the same place as you stood. He set it on the table between them. Caleb looked at it. Force Recon insignia. The patina of something that had been carried for decades in a pocket, handled, touched, present. "I don't," he started. "You're not taking it as a tribute," Silas said. "You're taking it as a receipt, proof that someone was in this room this morning who knew exactly what you did and what it cost." He pushed it toward him. "That's different from a medal. Medals are from institutions. That's from a person." Caleb looked at the coin, then at Silas. He picked it up, held it for a moment, the weight of it, the worn edges. Then he set it down in front of Silas. "You've been carrying that for 30 years, Caleb said. "It belongs with you." Silas looked at it. "I've got another," he said. Caleb looked at him. "Take it," Silas said simply. Caleb took it. Agent Hazel reappeared with her tablet and the formal statement forms that the situation required before anyone could leave the building. She moved efficiently through the room, collecting signatures and recorded accounts, and when she came to Ronan, she spent several minutes in quiet conversation with him, speaking with the measured register of someone who is giving a younger colleague information they need in a way that won't damage them. Ronan listened with the attentiveness of someone who understands that he's being handed something important and intends to carry it carefully. When Hazel came to Floyd, something happened that nobody in the room had anticipated. Floyd took the pen she offered, signed the statement form, and then looked up and said, "I should tell you something." Hazel looked at him. "About what I said earlier, about the man." He looked toward Caleb's table. "The security guard story. Fort Collins, fired for drinking." He set the pen down. "I made that up." Hazel said nothing, waited. "I recognized him," Floyd said. "Not personally, but I knew what I was looking at, the way he moved, the way he positioned himself, the thing with the dog." He looked at his hands. "I'm retired military too. 7 years Army, 2 deployments. Not what he did, not anywhere near it. But you learn to read certain things." He paused. "I got scared." "Of what?" Floyd thought about how to say it. "I knew something was wrong in that corner. I'd been watching Slade since he walked in, and I didn't like anything about him. And then this man came in and I could see him working through it, and I thought," he stopped. "I told myself if I gave him a false name to attach to, it would slow things down, buy time. Give someone a reason to remove him before whatever was going to happen happened. He looked up. I was wrong. I see that now. I was trying to protect him by misdirecting everyone away from him, and what I actually did was compound the problem. Hazel was looking at him with professional neutrality. Why didn't you come forward with your own assessment of Slade? Because I didn't want to be the one who called it wrong, Floyd said. In front of everyone, in my own kitchen. The honesty of it was unvarnished. I've been wrong before, in a different context, and people got hurt because I was confident when I shouldn't have been. So I stopped trusting my own read. I've been stopping it for 11 years. He looked at the form. That's the whole of it. Hazel noted something on her tablet. Thank you for telling me, she said. Is it going to be a problem? Legally? What you said created a brief misdirection in a fluid situation, Hazel said. It didn't alter the outcome. She looked at him squarely. But that's the kind of decision that accumulates, one way or the other. You understand what I mean. Floyd looked at her. Yes, ma'am, he said. Hazel moved on. Floyd stood for a moment beside the pass-through, and then, deliberately, with the considered movement of someone acting on a decision rather than an impulse, he walked to Caleb's table. Liam was awake by now, sitting up beside Rex with his hair pressed flat on one side and the disoriented expression of a child trying to reconstruct the sequence of events that led to him being on a diner floor. Caleb was talking with one of Hazel's agents, providing his own formal account in the clipped, exact language of someone describing events rather than experiencing them. Rex had his head in Liam's lap. Floyd stopped at the edge of the table, waited. Caleb finished with the agent and looked up. I told them the truth, Floyd said, about what I did, the story I made up. Caleb said nothing. I was wrong about you, Floyd said. That's the simple part of it. The more complicated part is that I knew I was looking at something real, and I chose to manage it instead of act on it. He met Caleb's eyes. I'm sorry for that. Caleb looked at him for a moment. There was no theatrics in the silence, no drawn-out evaluation, no performance of considering whether forgiveness was warranted. Just a man deciding what to say. You saw something this morning that reminded you of something that hurt you, Caleb said. You made a call you thought was protective. You were wrong. A pause. You told the truth when you didn't have to. That's not nothing. Floyd's face did something complex. He nodded, turned, and went back to the kitchen, where the morning's tickets were still clipped above the pass-through. The orders nobody would ever pick up. The ordinary business of the day suspended in its interrupted state. Otis Briggs had been sitting at the host stand for most of the last 30 minutes, watching the room with the expression of a man sorting through his own inventory. When Hazel finished her circuit and the formal statement collection was complete, he stood up and walked to the counter and picked up the ADA documentation that had been sitting there since Ivy set it down before going to intercept him 3 hours ago. He read it. He read it slowly, with the thoroughness of someone who has decided to actually read something rather than scan it for confirmation of what they already believed. He set it down, walked to Caleb's table, stood. I need to update the policy here, he said. Service animals, documentation requirements, all of it. He was looking at the table surface rather than Caleb directly. I should have known it already. I didn't because knowing it would have required me to change something I didn't want to change. The regulation's been federal law for over 30 years, Ivy said from behind the counter. Her voice was level, not cutting, carrying the matter-of-fact tone of someone stating a coordinate rather than making an argument. I know, Otis said. He looked at her, then at Caleb. Starting next week, we're establishing a proper accessibility policy. Dog-friendly section in the back, wheelchair-accessible tables marked and maintained, staff training on service animal law. He paused. Ronan is sending documentation. He mentioned, Caleb said. It's late, Otis said. You said it, Caleb said. Late is still a direction. Otis looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man receiving a grace he knows he hasn't fully earned and isn't sure how to hold without dropping it. Then he nodded and went back to his station. Liam had stood up and was now standing directly in front of Rex with the concentrated expression of a child forming a very important question. Rex sat and looked at him with patient dignity. Rex, Liam said formally, thank you for saving us. Rex's tail moved, once, then twice. Caleb watched this, something in the observation of it. The simple, uncomplicated exchange between a 7-year-old and a dog conducted with complete sincerity on both sides, settled something in him that the last several hours had been keeping unsettled. He put his hand in his chest pocket, felt the folded paper, felt Silas's coin beside it. The phone rang, the disposable Silas had given him, which was still on the table. He looked at it, an unknown number. He picked it up. "Hayes," he said. A pause, then a voice. Clean, neutral, with the quality of a person choosing each word with precise intent. "You know who this is?" It was not a question. And it was not Agent Hazel. And it was not anyone in Washington. And it was not anyone from the clean, documented side of anything Caleb had ever officially worked within. "I know," Caleb said. "Slade was a test," the voice said. "An indicator. They wanted to see if the circuit was still active, whether certain people would respond in certain places at certain times." A pause. "You responded." Caleb looked at the window, at the street where Cedar Falls was spreading itself across the sunlit asphalt in the fully relaxed posture of a town celebrating its best holiday, unaware of the calibration it had just undergone. "Who's running the test?" "That," the voice said, "is in the paper." The line went dead. Caleb set the phone down. He sat for a moment with both hands flat on the table, in the posture that the room had seen him occupy at intervals all morning, the arrangement of a man who is thinking rather than waiting, calculating rather than reacting. He reached into his chest pocket, took out the folded paper, read it a third time. His face was still. Ivy, from behind the counter, watched him read it. She didn't approach. She gave him the space that the moment required, the specific skill of understanding when another person is in the middle of something that has nothing to do with you and needs the room to be empty around it. Hazel appeared at his shoulder. She had seen the phone call. "Who was that?" "Unknown number," Caleb said. She looked at the phone. "I'd like to have our technical team." "It'll be clean," Caleb said. "Whoever it was has been doing this longer than your team has been assembled." He looked at her. "The paper you gave me, Operation Hollow Bridge." He waited. Her expression shifted slightly. Not surprise, the managed version of surprise that trained people produce when they've anticipated a possibility and are confirming it. "You know the designation." "I know what it's connected to," Caleb said. "I was adjacent to the beginning of it, 7 years ago, in a different capacity, in a different country." He looked at the paper. "Someone went to considerable trouble to put me in Cedar Falls on a specific morning when a specific person was going to be in a specific diner. The question being whether that someone is on your side of the problem," Hazel said. "That's always the question," Caleb said. Hazel sat down. She put her tablet on the table and looked at him with the uncurated directness of someone who has set aside the professional management of the conversation. "I was briefed on Hollow Bridge 14 months ago," she said. "I've been building a case on the peripheral elements. Slade was one data point. The network is larger than current public estimates would suggest, and it has access to resources that indicate either significant funding or significant internal exposure." She looked at him. "We have been trying to identify the primary architect for 14 months. We have a direction, but not a source." "What do you need?" "Someone who can operate outside the documented framework," she said. "Who the network doesn't know is active. Who has direct experience with the tactical methodology." She met his eyes. "Who can work with an asset that doesn't appear in any personnel database?" She looked at Rex. Rex looked at her. Caleb looked at the street, at the families, at the children eating ice cream on the sidewalk in the July heat, the flags limp now in the stilled air of late morning. The parade over, but its residue still coating everything in the particular residue of collective celebration. He thought about the cabin in Montana he'd been renting for 2 years, about the appliances he fixed for neighbors who couldn't afford a service call, about the mornings when he drove to a trailhead before sunrise and walked until his prosthetic required adjustment, and Rex ran wide patterns through the meadow grass, and there was no sound except the kind that requires no interpretation. He thought about the voice on the disposable phone, about the 17 devices he'd told Slade he had disarmed, about the 8th man on a patrol in Kandahar province in the autumn of 2011, who had not walked away from a culvert the way the 7 beside him had, and whether there was an accounting that made sense of that differential, and whether anything you did afterward was either repayment or simply continuation. He picked up his coffee mug. It was empty. He set it down. "Rex needs to eat at regular intervals," he said. 18-hour operational cycles maximum, with mandatory rest after any active detection work. His hip has some wear. Cold weather aggravates it. He needs a specific vitamin supplement that I carry." He looked at Hazel. Non-negotiable. Hazel said nothing. She was very still. I'm not re-enlisting, Caleb said. I'm not under command. I will not be managed by committee or briefed by people who don't have the clearance to understand the context they're briefing. He looked at the paper, at the Operation Hollow Bridge designation at the bottom, and the smaller line of text below it that he had read 3 times, and that had communicated, with the efficient precision of a people who know how to put maximum information in minimum words, exactly how large the thing behind Slade's quiet presence in the corner of a holiday diner actually was. I'll make one contact, he said. One preliminary conversation, no commitment beyond that conversation. Hazel let out a breath. Understood. And Cedar Falls gets left out of it entirely, he said. This diner, these people, none of it appears in any documentation connected to whatever happens next. Hazel looked at him. I can't. Yes, you can, Caleb said. The incident report will list Slade's apprehension as a result of coordinated federal surveillance and K-9 detection at a public venue during a public event. That's accurate. The names of the civilian witnesses will be redacted at the request of the lead agent. He looked at her. You're the lead agent. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, agreed. Then we'll talk, Caleb said. He stood up. He put money on the table. Enough for the coffee and the pancakes and the bowl of water, counted exactly. He picked up Silas's coin and put it in his pocket. He picked up the folded paper and returned it to his chest pocket beside the coin. Rex rose from the floor without being asked, positioning himself at Caleb's left side with the attentive readiness of an animal who can read the specific quality of a person standing up and distinguish between standing up to leave and standing up for other reasons. Liam was looking up at them both. He was 7 years old, and he had just slept through the denouement of something he would understand differently in 20 years. But the part he had been awake for, the dog, the man, the morning's particular weight, had been absorbed in the unselfconscious way that children absorb things that will surface later, fully formed when they are grown enough to have words for them. Will Rex come back? He asked. Caleb looked at the boy. I don't know, he said. But if he does, you'll hear him before you see him. Liam nodded, in the same serious way he had nodded earlier when told that Rex had done a lot of work. He reached out and put his small hand on Rex's muzzle, briefly, and Rex permitted this with the patience of a dog that has long since made peace with the many shapes that human affection takes. Ivy came from behind the counter. She stopped in front of Caleb. There was a thing she was trying to say that she hadn't fully formulated yet, and she was honest enough to let that process be visible rather than filling the space with something premature. Finally, I'm glad you asked. He looked at her. For the table? Yes, she held his eyes. For that, he nodded. A single motion, the coin's weight in his pocket, the paper in his chest, Rex solid against his left leg. Your coffee, he said, is the best I've had in a long time. She smiled. It was a real one. Liam's going to tell that story forever, she said. Good, Caleb said. Let him. He turned toward the door. Silas, from his counter stool, raised his mug. Not a salute, not the formal thing, not the performance of recognition, but the private thing. The version that passes between people who have moved in the same world and don't require the institutional choreography to make it real. Caleb met his eyes across the room and nodded. Otis held the door. He held it in the way of someone who knows the gesture can't do what he wishes it could, and is making it anyway, because the only available reconciliation between who you were at 10 a.m. and who you are at noon is the next thing you do. He held it open and looked at the floor and said, Take care of yourself. Caleb walked through. Rex walked through beside him. The door swung closed behind them, and the bell above it made its small, ordinary sound. Liberty Diner absorbed their absence the way any room absorbs a departure, with the slight acoustic shift of a space reconfiguring itself around what's no longer in it. The FBI equipment was being packed. The booths were slowly being restored to their ordinary use. Floyd was back at the flat top. Ivy was refilling the counter coffee. Liam was sitting on the stool Silas vacated, telling Silas about what Rex had felt like to touch, the conversation running on with the unedited generosity of a child recounting the most significant morning of his recent life. Silas listened, drank his coffee, nodded at the right intervals. At the large booth, Fletcher Donovan was looking out the window. Dahlia had left 10 minutes ago, departing with the slightly compressed manner of someone accelerating out of a situation they'd rather have a different relationship to in memory. Blake had gone with her. Fletcher had stayed. He was watching the street, the families on the sidewalk, the ice cream, the flags. He stayed like that for a long time. Outside, Caleb and Rex moved east on Main Street, against the current of the celebration, through the particular July morning noise of a small town that is exactly what it claims to be, and has just been kept that way without knowing it. The prosthetic made its sound on the pavement, not conspicuous, not hidden, simply present, the sound of a man walking. Rex moved beside him with the liquid efficiency of a working dog not working, covering ground because ground is what you cover when you go forward. At the corner of Main and Elm, Caleb stopped. He took the folded paper from his chest pocket. Read it one final time standing in the July sun while children ran past him with sparklers they were not yet allowed to light. And a man 2 yards away was explaining the history of the Continental Congress to a disinterested 12-year-old, and the last of the parade volunteers were rolling up the spectator barriers. He put the paper back. He looked at Rex. "What do you think?" Rex looked up at him. Dark eyes, the silver threads along the muzzle, the years in the posture. He sat. It was not a human answer. It was better than one. Caleb took out the disposable phone. He dialed the number from the paper, not the Federal Coordination line, not the Washington extension, but the third number, the one in a different handwriting, smaller, in the margin. It rang 4 times. A voice answered, different from the morning's voice. Female, precise, carrying the quality of complete attention. "Who is this?" "Someone Hazel vouches for," Caleb said. A pause. 1 moment. He waited. Rex sat beside him in the July heat and watched the street with the even, undiscriminating attentiveness of an animal that has decided that paying attention to everything is the safest version of paying attention to anything. The voice returned. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes?" "Retired," Caleb said. "Of course." The voice had the trace of something that was not quite a smile. "We'd like to have a conversation." "I've been told," Caleb said. "I have terms. We expected you would." "Rex comes," Caleb said. "Everything else is secondary to that." A pause. "He's on the operational roster already," the voice said. "He has been for 6 months." Caleb looked at his dog. Rex looked at the street, at the children, at the flags, at whatever a dog sees when it looks at the world. The layer of information that runs under the visible surface of things, the layer that only the particular architecture of that animal's perception can access, the layer that had walked into a diner at 10:41 a.m. and identified the one wrong thing in a room full of right-looking things and had not moved from that knowledge until the world caught up with it. "One conversation," Caleb said. "No commitment." "We'll take what we can get," the voice said. He ended the call. Stood at the corner of Main and Elm in Cedar Falls on the 4th of July with the sound of a celebration behind him, and the particular weight of a folded paper in his pocket, and the particular weight of a coin from a man who had spent 22 years force recon and had held it since then as evidence that something had happened and now had passed it along as the same kind of evidence to a different person. He started walking. Rex walked beside him. A small girl on the sidewalk dropped her flag, the kind they hand out at parades, a small paper rectangle on a thin wooden stick. It landed on the pavement directly in Caleb's path. He bent without breaking stride and picked it up and handed it back to her. She looked at his leg, then up at his face, then took the flag back. "Thank you," she said, with the formal gravity that children apply to thank yous when their parents have successfully trained them. "You're welcome," Caleb said. He and Rex continued down the street. The July light came through the buildings in long, warm rectangles, and the last of the parade music was fading, and Cedar Falls was becoming itself again. The afternoon version, the more relaxed version, the version that didn't know anything specific about the morning, except that it had been a good one. At the far end of Main Street, before they turned and disappeared from view, Rex stopped. He turned and looked back at Liberty Diner. The plate glass windows, the flag hanging above the door, the ordinary exterior of a place that was exactly what it appeared to be from the outside and had been, this morning, something else entirely. He stood there for a moment in the particular stillness of an animal who has completed a task and knows it. Then he turned back around and walked on. Nobody in the diner saw this. It happened outside, without witnesses, in the honest July morning, which was precisely where most of the important things had been happening all day, visible to anyone who was paying attention, and invisible to everyone who wasn't. The Liberty Diner bell rang once as the last FBI agent came through the door. 3 minutes ago, nobody in Cedar Falls knew the name Caleb Hayes. Now every single person in that diner does, and none of them will ever forget it. If this story hit you somewhere deep, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Subscribe for more stories about the people we overlook, who turn out to be the ones carrying everything. Don't go anywhere. The final chapter is the one that will stay with you. Some debts have no invoice. They're settled in the currency of the next right thing, not because anyone is watching, not because a record is kept, but because the alternative is to have been the kind of person who, when it mattered, chose to look away. Caleb Hayes had not chosen to look away. He had never, in 41 years, successfully chosen to look away. The prosthetic was the proof of how far that particular inability had taken him, and he had made his peace with it the way you make peace with the unchangeable, not by accepting it as good, but by insisting on living forward through it. The paper in his pocket named something large. The voice on the phone knew where he was before he knew himself where he was going. Rex had been on a roster for 6 months, meaning someone had been watching the pattern, the circuit that Silas had named, the thing that finds the person who cannot not find it. In Cedar Falls, in Liberty Diner, Ivy Coleman was refilling coffee for the last remaining customers. Her son, asleep now on the break room couch, the morning's chaos settling into the manageable past. She would think about the man with the prosthetic and the dog for the rest of the day, and for several days after, and occasionally after that, at unscheduled intervals for years. She would tell Liam the story when he was older, not as a lesson because the best stories don't announce their lessons, but as a fact about a morning that had been real. A man had walked in and asked to sit down. Most of the room had tried to make that impossible. Something had been waiting in the corner, and the man had been, without performance or announcement, exactly who was needed. At the corner of Main and Elm, a folded paper traveled east in a chest pocket. Somewhere to the northeast, a phone was ringing. And on the plain face of a challenge coin, worn smooth by 3 decades in a pocket, the Force Recon insignia caught the July light one final time before disappearing into the shadow of a man walking forward, as men have always walked forward because there is no other direction.